Greetings, everyone. I am unfortunately very under the weather. Kids have been ill throughout the week and weekend. Now it's my turn. So that is why I'm not with you. I'm therefore recording the lecture. It's going to be up on Brightspace, obviously, along with a couple of associated videos and the readings for this week. So I am, of course, very sad not to be with you this Monday. You know how much I love being there with all of you. Look forward to seeing you all Wednesday. So here we go. For this week, we were doing David Hume's Of the Origin of Government and Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. And so we're still located at the tail end of the 18th century. We're still dealing with that crop of Enlightenment thinkers who we kicked off with Locke and Rousseau, and we had Montesquieu and Kant. So in The Origin of Government, David Hume is going to explore how governments develop naturally within societies as a solution to human needs and inclinations. Hume argues that the primary motivators for the formation of government are two basic principles here. Self-interest, and that's the one that I want you to really keep front of mind when we talk about the rationalists, the Enlightenment thinkers, and the necessity of social cooperation for stability, and this idea that necessary social cooperation can be recognized as self-interest. So rather than organized or explicit contract, Hume sees the development of government as an evolutionary process, one shaped by practical needs, customs, historical context. Let's just pause here and recall that way back in the second week of the course, for Aristotle, the political community, essentially arose from increasingly large collections of families. You've got a family, the children start families and live in the same location. Next generation, which is necessarily larger, does the same. And on we go until the small clan-like polity has expanded into a town and then city, with kinship ties being, gradually diminished, but a general good still being recognized. You speak the same language, have the same culture, customs. So we then had the social contract theorists, from Hobbes to Locke to Rousseau, who all developed social contract theories to explain the origins of political authority. And recall that their views on human nature, government, and individual rights differed significantly. Again, let's just review here. We're going to be seeing all of this stuff in another 5 weeks for the final, so let's just review here. Hobbes, in Leviathan, 1651, he's presenting a pessimistic view of human nature. He argues that in the state of nature, life is, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, because humans are driven by self-interest and prone to conflict. And to escape this violent existence, individuals agree to a social contract, surrendering their natural rights to an absolute sovereign. And Hobbes' theory is centered on the necessity of strong, centralized authority to prevent chaos. He argues that once individuals consent to a government, they forfeited their right to rebel even against a tyrannical ruler. So for Hobbes, maintaining peace and order was more important than preserving individual freedoms. We talked at length about that. You can go back and watch the video. It was Hobbes and Machiavelli. Then we looked at Locke. Locke's second treatise of government, to be specific, 1689. He offers a more optimistic view of human nature and government. Locke argues that in the state of nature, people are rational, free, and equal, governed by natural law, which dictates that they should not harm others in their life, liberty, or property. However, because individuals cannot always impartially judge disputes, they agree to form a government through mutual consent. We talked about, the need to do that. Unlike Hobbes, Locke insists that government is a fiduciary trust to protect natural rights. If it fails to do so, the people have a right to revolt. Locke's emphasis on limited government, the protection of property rights, and the right of rebellion contrasts, therefore, very sharply with Hobbes' belief in absolute sovereignty. And then we had Rousseau, writing almost a century later, The Social Contract, 1762. He diverges from both Locke, on the one hand, and Hobbes. While he agrees that political authority arises from a social contract, Rousseau views the state of nature as an idyllic, peaceful existence, corrupted by the development of society, property, and inequality. Rousseau argues that legitimate government must be based on the, quote, general will of the people, with individuals fully participating in self-government. For Rousseau, true freedom comes from submitting to laws that one had a hand in creating, and the general will is the sovereign. Unlike Locke, who emphasized individual rights and property, therefore, Rousseau is much more concerned with collective freedom and equality. His vision of government was one that entailed more direct democracy and communal decision-making, which contrasted with Locke's emphasis on limited and representative government. So, to summarize those three here, because I just went through them paragraph by paragraph. Hobbes is advocating for a strong, centralized authority to control human nature. Again, he's a rationalist, though. He's not arguing divine right of kings. Locke envisions a government limited by the rule of law and established to protect natural rights. Rousseau, by contrast, sees the need for a more direct participatory form of government that reflects the collective will of the people. And these differences are just reflections, in large part functions, of their divergent views on human nature and the role of government in ensuring peace, freedom, and justice. So Hume is going to fall, so I would say probably more on Locke's side here. So Hume begins by asserting that humans inherently act out of self-interest. And this emphasis is in part why I grouped him with Smith, the father of classical economics, who, as we'll see here in just a few minutes, believed that individuals pursuing their own self-interest would actually produce the optimal outcome for everyone in society. It's getting a little bit ahead of myself there, but that's just something to keep in mind. For Hume, acting out of self-interest can lead to conflict without social mechanisms to manage disputes and promote cooperation. In the absence of governments, individuals may initially be motivated to cooperate voluntarily out of a desire for more personal security, social bonds, and economic benefits. However, Hume argues that while voluntary cooperation may work in small communities, it becomes unsustainable as societies grow larger. As the population expands and becomes more complex, self-interest alone becomes insufficient to maintain order and stability, necessitating the formation of governing bodies that enforce laws and mediate conflicts. And this kind of harkens back to Aristotle's belief about needing to keep the city-state small, because empires could only be governed by tyrannies. A significant part of Hume's argument, then, is that government is not a result of deliberate, rational choice or a hypothetical social contract, as proposed by Hobbes and Locke. Instead, government emerges organically as societies seek to address real-life challenges. Hume notes that the earliest forms of government were likely rudimentary and centered around patriarchal or tribal authority. As societies grew, these forms of authority became institutionalized, taking on various structures to meet the demands of larger, more diverse populations. One of the key contributions to Hume's work is his recognition of the interplay between authority and habit. According to Hume, people come to obey laws and submit to authority figures not just out of fear or a sense of duty, but because these behaviors have become habitual over time. This habitual obedience to authority figures is critical for a functioning society, Hume contends, and over time political power becomes legitimized and accepted simply because it has persisted and established continuity. And in this sense, Hume views political legitimacy as something that can arise from long-standing social norms rather than moral or logical justification. So, Hume further argues that governments are inherently imperfect, as they are composed of individuals who are subject to the same weaknesses as any other members of society. For Hume, the stability of government is rooted not in an ideal moral framework, but in the pragmatic balance between personal interests and the public good. Therefore, governments succeed when they balance self-interest and public welfare, creating conditions in which individuals feel incentivized to act for their mutual benefit. So, he rejects the notion of an ideal government founded on abstract principles, and instead emphasizes that government is a practical response to human needs and societal complexities. His analysis of political authority as a product of custom, habit, and practical necessity makes a case for understanding government as an evolutionary institution shaped by the practical needs of society rather than theoretical ideas, or later ideas that we'll touch on in the final week of class, kind of the wrapping up, the idea of the stationary bandit theory of state formation. So, but we're going to transition now to Smith. Okay, so I said that I was going to talk a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Smith. So, the political economy that arose due to the age of exploration. Remember, we have Europeans going out and encountering all of these different societies. And this prompted reflections on how climate can produce different political structures. In Montesquieu, it prompted Hume to think about the origins of states and societies. Well, on the level of political economy, how the government manages its finances, how it manages its monetary and fiscal policy, the age of exploration and later colonization and imperialism is going to have a huge impact on this. And by the time that we are exploring here now, the 1770s and 1780s, 1780s, 1790s, Columbus set sail hundreds of years ago. Spain is already a declining power, been declining for some time. The response that governments had to this new globalized trading network was to view trade as basically an extension of warfare. That if you had captured some resources, you wanted to keep other powers from getting access to these resources. And I'm going to read you something here in a moment from someone named Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was a very popular advocate in high French political circles under Mazarin, one of the great French absolute monarchs ministers. He was actually a disciple of, Richelieu, who I had mentioned in the context of the 30 Years' War, talking about religious warfare and its impact on politics in Germany. But I'm going to read you something here in a minute because he expresses this idea that is generally known as mercantilism. Mercantilism. And it's important to understand what mercantilism is, because in 1776, when Adam Smith is writing an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, which we usually just call the wealth of nations, he's going to be flying completely in the face of these ideas. Now, he's not the first person to do it. There was a whole group of French physiocrats. The name of one of them is escaping me. He winds up getting sacked. He tries to implement some sort of what we would call free market reforms. Oh gosh, his name's escaping me. Oh well. Anyway, it was recognized that that this policy, mercantilism, which involved high amounts of government regulation, taxes, tariffs, and capturing faraway colonies, and then stationing troops and maintaining a navy to defend these things against other powers getting in there, was not the optimal way to ensure the wealth, not only of your own society, but of everyone's society. And so what Adam Smith is going to be arguing is that by lifting taxes, deregulating, eliminating barriers to trade, having an open global trading system is actually going to be in everyone's self-interest and make us all richer. So I'm just going to read you this quote here from Colbert to give you an idea, because it is something that today is still very attractive. We hear economic warfare all the time, that we're going to use tariffs or something or other. It appeals to sort of this kind of I guess Smith would have said an unenlightened understanding of self-interest. So this is Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He's writing in 1664. He had commissioned this pamphlet called The Advantages of Colonial Trade. From thence, meaning the East and West Indies, we fetch our gold and precious stones and 1,000 other commodities, to which we are so accustomed that it is impossible for us to be without them. Silk, cinnamon, pepper, ginger, nutmegs, cotton cloth, porcelain, woods for dyeing, ivory, frankincense, etc. So that having an absolute necessity upon us to make use of these things, why should not rather furnish ourselves than take them from others, and apply that profit hereafter to our own countrymen, which we have hitherto allowed strangers? I cannot understand. So he's saying, why should we buy things from the English and the Dutch? We should just be totally self-sufficient, and we should just capture all these raw material sources ourselves, do all our own industry. Adam Smith says, look, this is a way to increase, this leads to greatly increased taxes on the people, which suppresses output. Okay, one thing to remember though is these absolute monarchs are trying to build centralized, more professional bureaucracies and armies, so they're interested in this tax revenue. And of course, if you eliminate all of these tariffs and taxes and things of that nature, you are going to lower the royal revenue. Probably, it's possible that if you had some kind of income tax or something, or some kind of sales tax, it's possible that would be stimulated by these policies. But this policy, it made intuitive sense that geopolitics is a zero-sum game. If the Prussians acquire that slice of territory, we, the French, now cannot have it. We have lost out. They view trade the same way. And so Adam Smith is reacting against this. So this is the foundational work in classical economics. Now remember, there was no such thing as the study of economics. Economics meant like home economics in the Greek sense, the study of how to manage your household. He was not an economist. Retrospectively, we've called him an economist. in the tradition of Ricardo and all those who came after him. But he was actually a moral philosopher. He was most famous for a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is a very good read. Strongly recommend. But this book is the one that he's most well remembered for, and as being the father of classical economics. So he's interested in what drives economic prosperity and what the government can do to foster it, or rather what the government should not be doing in order to foster it. The book outlines Smith's theories on free markets, the division of labor, and the invisible hand, which would become central to modern economic thought. So, much in the same way, we're not going to read all of Hume's tracts, so I want to give you a broad overview of that. We're definitely not going to read all of Smith's Wealth of Nations. It's like 1,300 pages long. We're reading a very small section of this. So I want to give you an overview. Smith begins by examining how labor is the primary source of wealth in any society. So he has the labor theory of value, just like Ricardo, just like Marx. And he proposes the productivity of labor, rather than the accumulation of gold or silver, is the true measure of economic prosperity. So he's saying these mercantilists who think all that matters is having a positive balance of trade, meaning goods are going out to other countries, gold and silver is coming in. That's not the most important thing. He introduces the concept of the division of labor, which he argues allows workers to specialize in specific tasks, leading to increased productivity and efficiency. By focusing on tasks suited to their skills and eliminating the need for time-consuming transitions between different kinds of work, workers can produce more output, benefiting society as a whole. And Smith's famous example is the pin factory, where workers, by dividing the tasks, produce far more pins than if each worker attempted every step of the process themselves. So, and again, this is all stuff that we take for granted now, but this was very radical at the time. So, he's advocating for free markets, and there's going to be a tradition of British liberals who come after him in the 19th century, who are going to seize on this idea and are going to advocate free markets. They want to limit government intervention. He argues that when individuals are left to pursue their self-interest, they unintentionally contribute to the public good through an invisible hand that guides the market. In a competitive market, individuals will seek to maximize profits, and in doing so, they produce goods and services more efficiently, setting prices according to supply and demand. This process, Smith contends, results in the optimal allocation of resources without the need for government intervention, which only leads to market distortions. So, while Smith does support some minimal government involvement, he recognizes certain roles for the state in what he calls basically public works and institutions. So these are areas where he says, maybe the private sector might not be more effective. Things like national defense, infrastructure. Smith believes essentially that the government should establish institutions that provide public benefit. Things like building roads, bridges, which are essential for a productive society. If you are running a business, whether it's an import-export business, a pin factory, you need roads. And it's one of those goods that's going to come to be called a natural monopoly. Not the bad kind of monopoly that Smith is going to argue against. This is just one of those rare goods like national defense and the roads, where he's going to argue it's just better to have one provider, and that provider would be most efficient as the state, in theory. So, Smith is also critical, he's very critical of monopolies and government-backed privileges. Now, monopolies at the time was something the government sold to you for revenue. I talked about how the French crown, one of the ways it stimulated revenue when it was trying to centralize and create the absolute monarchy, is they would sell offices for revenue. They would also sell monopolies. They would say, okay, we've acquired this colony in Louisiana, and this group of investors, has come forward and said, we want to form the Louisiana Company. We want exclusive trading rights in the Louisiana Territory, and then the king grants it in exchange for money. Okay, so Smith is saying this is a terrible idea. These distort the free market. He also was opposed to things like merchant guilds, which were almost like modern-day unions, closed shops. You couldn't just enter and exit a profession. Also, trade restrictions. Other governments weren't about to let you come trade in their colonies for nothing. And so what he's criticizing here is the broad policy of intervention and mercantilism. Accumulating wealth through exports and restricted imports, this is not the way to go, says Smith. If the British make cotton cloth, much cheaper and more efficiently than us French, we should not produce our own cloth if it's not competitive. What we should do is produce more of what we're good at. Wine, cheese, for example, and then trade those goods to the British for their cotton cloth. And so this is the whole idea here. This is how free markets make us richer. And if it's difficult to conceptualize that, one of the videos I'm going to put up be warned, it is a little bit mathematized. That is what microeconomics is. But he's going to show you how two countries only producing what they have, quote, comparative advantage in, okay, is going to lead to higher outcomes in each country than if they each tried to produce everything themselves. Say, wine and shirts. You got the British trying to produce wine and shirts, you got the French trying to produce wine and shirts, and they're going to have a certain equilibrium outcome. And if we just say, all right, British, all the labor that's making the wine is now going to make the cotton, and you're just going to trade it to the French, who aren't going to make any cotton, they're just going to shift all their labor into wine, that by trading these two things together, you can actually reach a much higher optimal outcome for both countries. And this is broadly true. So, and again, this is very radical. It's going to take a long time for people like Cobden to win those arguments and repeal things like the Corn Laws. Because, of course, just as now, there are entities that benefit from having protective tariffs in place. One of the reasons that the U.S. government spends billions and billions of dollars each year on farm subsidies is because those farmers are critical votes in the Midwest. No one wants to alienate them. Same with the British government. There were these things called the Corn Laws, which prevented the import of cheaper food goods for the people who wanted cheaper food. But the landowning class who grew all of the corn, they obviously didn't want all this cheap corn coming in. They wanted to maintain their profits. And so, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I'm going to post both of those videos. One on just mercantilism. It's like a 5-minute video, just in case you are someone who's more of a visual learner. Had we been in class, I would have drawn these things on the board. Same with the supply and demand graph. That's why I'm posting these. They're very short videos. I think together they're 10 minutes long. But hopefully these will help you to visualize the things that I've been talking about. Along with the videos, I'm going to post your readings for this week. I see that almost all of you have at least a general paper topic. That's great. Discussion boards are going to increasingly be about the paper, like turn in a rough draft of this paper for this week's discussion board. That's not this coming week, so don't anybody panic. But at some point in November, I'm going to say this week, I want to see something that you're working on so that December 8th doesn't roll around. You're like, question, I don't know how to write a paper. That's something that if it's true, which I'm sure it's not entirely true, but maybe you have a lot of questions, aren't great at getting started. That's something that we can deal with over the month of November. Back and forth and via email, sharing documents back and forth, turning on track changes. It's all very, very doable. Yes, I will see you all Wednesday. The readings will be up. Yeah, I'm sure I'll be feeling better by then. But I certainly don't want to get you all sick. So, thank you all for joining me, albeit remotely today. Thank you all so much. Please email me if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. Okay, I'll see you Wednesday.